Located 1.25 miles off the coast of San Francisco Bay lies the infamous Alcatraz Island. This small piece of land, measuring just 1,675 feet by 590 feet, has a rich history that dates back to the 19th century when it served as a lighthouse and military base. Later on, it became a military prison before being transformed into one of America's most notorious penitentiaries in 1934, a place that instilled fear in even the most dangerous criminals. The Rock, as it came to be known, was known for its impenetrability, and it held some of the most notorious convicts in the United States. Today, Alcatraz Island stands as a somber museum that attracts visitors from all over the world. Despite its reputation as an inescapable fortress, history tells us that 2 men may have successfully fled the island, while others met their demise in the frigid waters surrounding it. Despite numerous attempts, no one ever managed to escape Alcatraz successfully. Al Capone. Al Capone is a name that looms large in the annals of Italian organized crime. He is a figure that has been portrayed in countless movies and television shows, where he is often depicted as having a dual personality, one that is both benevolent and ruthless. Capone was known for his Robin Hood-like antics, stealing from the rich and sharing his spoils with the less fortunate. However, he was also responsible for ordering the deaths of many individuals and had a notorious temper that could flare up at any moment. One of the most infamous events associated with Capone is the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, which cemented his reputation as a truly villainous figure. In 1929, Capone was briefly incarcerated for carrying deadly weapons, but it was a minor sentence. However, in 1931, he was hit with charges of tax evasion and violating prohibition laws. After serving time in prison, he was eventually sent to the impenetrable fortress of Alcatraz. Capone was eventually released in 1939, but his health deteriorated rapidly due to complications of syphilis, causing him to lose his mind. He passed away in 1947, leaving behind a legacy of infamy that still resonates to this day. James Whitey Bulger. An Irish-American gangster was another notorious figure in the world of organized crime. Like many of his counterparts, he too was portrayed in movies and television shows. Bulger was known for his hot temper and a propensity for violence, which he wielded with an iron fist. He was also an FBI informant, which likely contributed to his brutal beating and death in prison in 2018. Bulger was a dangerous individual, suspected of being involved in scores of murders, though he was only officially charged with 11. He spent time in Alcatraz in 1959, following a stint at an Atlanta prison for bank robberies. His 20-year sentence was reduced after it was discovered that he had taken part in the MK Ultra LSD trials. Despite his incarceration, Bulger never gave up on the idea of escape. He was friends with the men who attempted the infamous Alcatraz escape and believed they had succeeded. In fact, he once wrote, "The morning of the escape was one of the happiest moments of my life. I can still remember it as if it were yesterday." After his release in 1965, Bulger became a much more prolific and vicious criminal. In the 1990s, he became the subject of one of the largest manhunts in history. He managed to evade arrest for 16 years before finally being apprehended. However, his later years were not kind to him, and he met a violent end in prison. Robert Stroud, also known as the Birdman of Alcatraz, may not have had the same level of violence and bloodshed as some of the other notorious criminals on this list, but his criminal record and behavior behind bars earned him a place on it. As a diagnosed psychopath, he had a history of violence against other inmates and prison staff. In a particularly gruesome incident, he killed a prison guard by stabbing him with a homemade weapon. Transferred to Alcatraz in 1942, Stroud spent at least 6 years in solitary confinement and ultimately died while still serving his sentence at a medical center. Although he was known for his interest in birds and his contributions to ornithology, his actions in prison were enough to make him one of the most dangerous men in the United States, and thus deserving of his place on this list. Machine Gun Kelly. This man didn't earn the name Machine Gun Kelly for nothing. His real name was George Kelly, but you can forget about that. He was a notorious criminal, feared by many in the land of the free. This guy knew his way around a Thompson submachine gun, and the FBI recognized him as an expert machine gunner. You've seen those guns in those old-timey movies, right? Yeah, that's the one he preferred. Now, when he was locked up in Alcatraz, he was known to be a model prisoner, despite his reputation on the outside. He was inmate number 117, and he spent a solid 17 years on the Rock. After that, he got transferred out in 1951. But he didn't get to enjoy his freedom for long. He died of a heart attack while still in the slammer in 1954. This guy was no saint. He had a rap sheet full of robberies and kidnappings, and he had many run-ins with law enforcement. Even though he was never formally charged with murder, the FBI had their suspicions about him. Morton Sobel. A former engineer may not have been a violent criminal, but his actions were deemed by FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover as the crime of the century. Along with a small group, he was accused of spying on the U.S. and supplying the Soviet Union with sensitive information related to nuclear technology and military advances. Despite some claiming his innocence, Sobel was convicted of espionage in 1951 and served nearly 18 years of his 30-year sentence. During his time at Alcatraz until its closure in 1963, Sobel was known for being a well-behaved prisoner. In his book On Doing Time, published in 1974, he maintained his innocence and suggested that his crime was politically motivated. He spent most of his time reading books, including one with a room overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge. Sobel's mild-mannered demeanor and status as an enemy of the state helped him get along with other inmates. It's up to the reader to investigate whether Sobel's actions were truly as dangerous as they were claimed to be. Alvin Karpis. A notorious gangster from the era of the Great Depression, earned his chilling nickname due to his eerie smile, which his associates found to be quite sinister. He rose to infamy as the leader of the Barker Karpis gang and was one of the 4 individuals designated as public enemy number 1 during the 1930s. Interestingly, he was the only one among the 4 to survive and be imprisoned, as the others were all killed before they could be caught. Can you name the other 3? They were John Dillinger, Pretty Boy Floyd, and Babyface Nelson. Karpis was also known for being the longest-serving inmate in Alcatraz, having spent a total of 26 years behind bars. He was convicted of a wide range of crimes, including robbery, kidnapping, burglary, and murder. He was said to be highly intelligent and even helped Charles Manson learn to play the guitar while they were both serving time in another prison. Karpis described Manson as having a pleasant voice and a pleasing personality, although he's unusually meek and mild for a convict. He never has a harsh word to say and is never involved in even an argument. After his release, Karpis wrote a book and lived in Spain, where some sources suggest that he may have taken his own life while working on another book. Others believe that his death was the result of an accidental overdose. Henry Young. Henry Young was a bank robber whose time behind bars left him scarred and dangerous. After being sent to Alcatraz in the 1930s, he attempted to escape with 4 other inmates in 1939. While 2 of the men were captured and 1 was shot and killed, Young turned himself in. But it was his time in solitary confinement that would change him forever. He was subjected to brutal treatment, spending years alone in a small cell. After being released from solitary, he murdered one of the men he had tried to escape with his defense claiming that his harsh treatment was a contributing factor. Young described the conditions in solitary as abhorrent, with no shoes, bed, or mattress, and only receiving a few slices of bread a day. He was released from another prison in 1972 but jumped parole and vanished without a trace. John and Clarence Anglin. Let's take a closer look at John and Clarence Anglin, as well as their accomplice Frank Morris. While they may not have been the most dangerous criminals, their daring escape from Alcatraz has become the stuff of legend. The planning for their escape was meticulous and involved months of hard work fashioning tools to help them navigate the prison's shafts and make their way out undetected. They were skilled at concealing their efforts and knew how to work quietly to avoid suspicion. To make their beds appear occupied, they even used stolen human hair and fashioned realistic-looking heads from soap. Their escape plan wasn't without its challenges, however. They needed to cross the water to reach freedom, and so they built an inflatable raft from stolen raincoats. All 3 men had criminal histories, with Morris being a repeat offender primarily involved in theft. Interestingly, he was known for having a high IQ of 133. The Anglin brothers were also bank robbers, but they prided themselves on avoiding violence and only used a toy gun if people were around. Nonetheless, their criminal exploits were successful and netted them a sizable fortune. Despite their criminal past, many people sympathize with the Anglins and Morris, viewing them as kind-hearted criminals who never intended to harm anyone. While the authorities believe they likely perished during their escape attempt, there are those who believe they managed to outsmart the system and secure their freedom. Regardless of what you believe, their story will forever be remembered as one of the most daring and intriguing prison breaks in history. So that's all for this episode. If you enjoy it, leave a subscribe and a comment. Until next time, good luck and see ya.